You're listening to a Meldo Entertainment original podcast. Hey everyone, and on this episode of the Ably Diverse Chronicles, I chat with the wonderful Samuel Hunter. He is one of Australia's elite male escorts, and we chat about his journey into the industry and the involvement with disability that he has had, not only with the NDIS, but also Touching Base, which is an organisation connecting people with disabilities to sex workers, and the barriers he has found that the NDIS creates between disability and sexuality. So why not join us right now? The following episode contains topics which some listeners may find distressing. If you are in need of support, please reach out to LIFELINE, Beyond Blue, or other such services in your area. How did you get into the industry?
In 2019, I was working in a sex shop in Western Sydney, and I read this article about a woman who was fighting a woman with MS, who was fighting the NDIS about using her funding to access sexual services. And she eventually won that case with them. But I kind of spoke to the manager of the sex shop about it, and she told me about Touching Base and the documentary Scarlet Road. And I guess I started thinking about like the issues people with disability would have in exploring their sex lives, their sexualities, etc. Like even in terms of working in a sex shop, like most sex shops in Sydney, you know, this was upstairs and it was completely inaccessible. But like, I mean, you know, heaps of people to that say, yeah, but you know, you can buy everything online these days. But if you can't push a button, you know, or if you can't reach the toy to where it needs to go, you don't know until you go into a sex shop and actually hold that item and try to push those buttons, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
Because of the item that it is, unless it's a faulty product, you can't get a return on a sex toy because, you know, the societal, what I guess most people look at people with disability through the medical model where, oh, you are broken and we must fix you. That whole gaze that happens there. So at the time I was pretty, I had a pretty low self-esteem at the time, and but I thought about it that day, and I was like, I wonder if that's something I can do, and I kind of I went to the decision that I could, but then I kind of, you know, was like looking in the mirror going, well, I could, but I'm not going to ever get booked, so I'll just leave that. And it was about a year later till I actually went ahead with it. After that first COVID lockdown in 2020, I did the pool funds from Super, and I used that to, you know, like build a website for Samuel Hunter and start advertising and doing all the photos and everything. But I also did my training to be a support worker through Higher Up, a disability support worker. So that's when I started interacting a lot more with anybody with a disability.
Do you find now that your self-esteem has like increased from what you do?
Yeah, kind of. It does. And then I'm like, you know, is this false self-esteem by, you know, having these people kind of build me up? You know, is that actually how I look at myself? And look, it's a day-to-day thing. You know, some days I'm like, oh, what am I doing? And then other days I'm like, fuck yeah, dude, looking sharp. Let's go.
You know what? I think we all go through that, because I've been doing this shit for going on 19 years, and even recently I've had days where I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? But then you've got these good moments of like, I know how much of an impact I'm having, not only on myself, but other people, and it makes it all worth it. And I'm getting the sense that you feel similar to that.
Yeah, definitely. But
Yeah.
like in terms of how we're viewing ourselves, like
Hmm.
it's pretty rare that I take like, especially like a nude mirror selfie or something, that I'm like, hey, that's pretty hot. And then I've kind of done a bit more in the last few months, and then I was like, actually, I don't mind that. And then that's sort of how I finally went, yeah, maybe I will start an OnlyFans.
You finally become to the point of being content with yourself as well. And that's the most awesome feeling when you can be content with yourself, I think.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. And it's been
Yeah.
quite a journey to get there.
Would you like to expand on that journey?
A bit over 8 years ago, I had a pretty severe motorcycle crash. Had a compound tibia fracture, which is where the bone pops through your skin. Um,
Damn. Yeah.
broke my jaw in two places, and there was lots of complications in the hospital. So that first time I was in there for 2 months,
Mm.
and then basically for the next year, every 3 months or so, the metal in my leg would break. So I had, I think, 4 more surgeries.
Holy. Okay. Wow.
So it was like it was nearly a year and a half from the crash until my final surgery.
Oh
Um,
my
and and
gosh.
like and like each time, I get out of hospital and I'm in a wheelchair, and then I end up
Mm.
on go down to crutches, and then I go down to a walking stick, and then I'm
Yeah.
starting to get somewhere, and then like the metal would
Go
break again.
backwards.
So
Oh
yeah,
fuck.
like the physicality of it was pretty tough, but the worst part was there was a medication uh, issue
Mm.
that really affected my mental health very badly. And none of the psychs that I saw at the time ever flagged that it was the medication, and like I'd be
Mm.
self harming, and nobody went, oh, maybe it's this level of medication
Yeah.
you're on.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
and
You
then,
you would think as medical professionals they'd be able to flag that pretty quickly.
yeah, you would think so,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
when it's like out of the blue sort
Yeah.
of things. It's not, there's not a history of this. It's just, oh,
Oh.
you've started doing that. Yeah.
Were you doing support work around that time as well? Or
No, not during that time at all. I was working, retail sort of
yeah,
things.
because I'm feeling like that experience may have made you realize how difficult things become for people. Would that be correct in saying?
You know what? I feel like when I do these kind of interviews and talk about these things, that's like people like to join those two together. But I can
Mm.
genuinely say, like when I was reading that article and talking to my manager about people with disability, etc.,
Mm.
I I didn't have that. I didn't
Okay.
embrace that label of being disabled. It's been like a year since I have, and it was
Yeah.
not a. It's not a. Oh, I don't want to be seen as being disabled. It was just a. There are people far worse off than I
Mm.
am. I
So
don't want to take this
how
title
did
away
you
from them.
feel about embracing that label then when you finally did?
Look, it was it it was a big week of embracing several
Mm.
labels,
Yeah.
and it was kind of, yeah, it was good, and it's good to acknowledge it. Like I'm quite I'm very passable. Most people don't know that, my leg has been shortened by an inch. They don't
Yeah.
see the wedge built up into the right shoe that I have.
Mm.
And I can forget as well. And I'll be like, oh, it's only a 25-minute walk from the city back home. I'll do that. And I'll get
Mm.
home and I'll just be in agony.
So it doesn't affect your work at all by the
No.
sound. No, that's wonderful.
Well, so I, so my crash was happened when I was coming home from work. So it was covered by work cover.
Yeah,
And
okay.
at the end, when they were signing me off on everything, I had to see this final doctor who had to measure all the scars and
Mm.
etc.
Mm.
And as we were leaving his office, he was like, "Look, you're going to get a payout. It's definitely not going to be life changing, but like your leg length discrepancy, etc. That is going to change. So he's like, you should try to start looking for work where you're not on your feet." I don't think he thought get into sex work was the option, but that's where I'm at.
Who cares?
So that's why it doesn't. Yeah, that's why it doesn't really affect work.
Obviously, those are the positives for you. But if you found the more clients you see that you've found more positives for them, and that's impacted you.
Yeah, when I started, I didn't really have any idea of what my clients would be like, why they'd be looking for a worker, etc. And it's been, it's continuously just hearing feedback from clients about what a difference it makes to their life in general. Like not even just that was heaps of fun, and I had this amazing sexual experience or whatever. It's the how that then bleeds into the rest of their life, whether that's their confidence or like having a better way of like setting boundaries in their personal life.
So social media for touching base. So how did you get into that?
Well, when we had that massive 4-month lockdown in Sydney in 2021, I was kind of looking at where I wanted to go with my career in sex work and how I could start giving back a bit. And touching base was the reason I was even in this work, and I was doing well from it. So I kind of wanted to give something back, and they were pretty inconsistent with their social media stuff. And so I emailed them and was like, "Hey, are you looking for someone to take over your social media? Like you don't even have an Instagram and that sort of thing." And they just grabbed me and went, "Yes, come and help us out of this."
That's awesome. So that's pretty good now.
Yeah, so I've been with them just a bit over 2 years, I think.
That's awesome.
Like I think I told you this after we started chatting that I was talking to one of my clients who's a paraplegic, and I think we were talking about porn and stuff, and she's like, I'm not the sort of person that goes that people want to see in porn, and I was like, excuse me, have you heard of I'll show you Melina? And just showed her your Twitter.
Yeah.
And she was mind blown by that, and was really and then in the biggest coincidence of all time, it was later that night was when you followed me back on Twitter. I was like, oh my God, her ears must have been burning.
I think it was. Yeah. So that's awesome, because I think that's the whole thing of my work, is if I've inspired, well, not inspire, I hate that word, but if I've encouraged someone to be more content with themselves, if they've got a different physical exterior to their norm, if you like, if I've encouraged them to be themselves, then hey, I've done part of my job already. Do you find with having clients with disability that the blurred line of consent, do you find it easy for people to consent for themselves? Because I know a lot of support workers are like, no, I'm not going to take my client to a service provider because they can't consent.
Well, how can they not consent? Like, there can be a blurred line, say, if somebody has an intellectual disability.
So how do you combat that? That was my question.
Well, I personally haven't had any client with an intellectual disability. Just mostly people with MS and CP. And there's one who it's quite hard to understand what she says in person, but we have very like she sends me a very specific email about how she wants things to go in the session, and then it's easier to check in about moving on to other things or et cetera, but without having to outline heavy things.
That's really good. Yeah, I've had quite a few friends that have wanted to, and all their support workers are like, no. I'm like, but they have autonomy over their lives. You
Correct.
can go and bang your husband or your wife or whatever it is. No one has to know about it. But yet you're stopping this, what may be a 40-year-old person from getting pleasure. So yeah.
But it's also like that's not the role of the support worker
Yeah,
at
exactly.
all.
Yeah.
And I think like I was in an expo representing Touching Base, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a disability expo, so it was a lot of support workers that were there and coming up and talking to us.
Yeah.
And I guess the way that I would put it to them would be like, well, if your client asks you to go to the bottle shop to get them a bottle of vodka or whatever,
Mm.
and they do that every single day for the week, every
Yeah.
week, that's
Yeah.
not that's not your decision to say, I think you've got a drinking problem. That's
Yeah, exactly.
like
Yeah.
you could maybe bring it up with a person that's listed about, are you aware that this person consumes that? And I'm just concerned about their health, mental health, whatever. That's a separate
Yeah.
thing. But at the end of the day, it's not what you personally think is right or wrong. That's not the
Yeah.
role of a support worker.
Because the amount of times that I've come across, even with alcohol, people like, oh, no, I won't buy in that because that's enabling him to then drink it. So therefore, I'm responsible for him getting drunk and we can't do that. I'm like, no, but you're not shoveling it down his mouth. You know what I mean? It's his choice to put it up to his mouth or
Mm-hmm.
ask for you to put it up to his mouth. It's not, you're not shoveling in, and that just, it really annoys me.
Well, okay, I guess the other
You know what I mean?
easier one would be if somebody was a smoker and
Yeah.
they asked their support worker to buy them cigarettes.
Mm, yeah.
That's their choice how they got into smoking or why they continue to
Yeah.
smoking. But it's not
It's
like
just,
just because you may not like smoking or be anti-smoking, that's not for you to say that
yeah.
you're not going to buy them cigarettes.
So I guess that brings me on to like when you've started sick, like have you found that less frustrating that you don't have to deal with that side of the support? Like you can just say, well, I'm providing a service that I know these people want. And, if support workers were involved, sometimes that can't happen because they're too precious. You know what I mean?
Uh,
Does that make sense?
well, I mean, obviously, I wasn't that kind of support worker either. Like,
Yeah.
somebody said this, I'm like, sure, let's
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because even when I've been like camming at home or wherever, a lot of support workers I've had said, oh, no, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm like, but you're not doing it. Just because you're
Yeah,
on shift doesn't mean I have to stop what I'm doing.
yeah,
But yeah, it's affected my mental health because I'm like, do I have to come out to every single person that walks through my door? I shouldn't have to, And even when it comes to self-pleasure, you always have to tell someone. It's frustrating.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's especially like the self pleasure thing.
Mm,
That's I think when I've done some stuff for media stuff for Touching Base, and people are talking about, why should sex services be, allowed in the NDIS? I'm like, look, we're one bad car crash away from
mm,
not being able to even masturbate.
yeah, yeah,
How would you feel if you had to go the rest of your life without that?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I think that's what frustrates me though and that's apart for lots of humans, I find, is
Yeah,
that they don't have that empathy for anybody unless they've experienced it or somebody very close to them has experienced it. Otherwise, it doesn't affect them.
yeah.
Like,
There's no realization there until you're actually in that space, which is
yeah,
really, yeah, yeah. It's really bizarre to me. And and I guess that's how I came into the industry as well, because I was that frustrated client and I thought, well, surely there's plenty of people out there like me. So I'm able to relieve that stress in a way from them that I'm feeling, and that gives back to myself as well. So
Yeah.
It's interesting how sex doesn't meet community standards as soon as disability is involved. Like what is that? Yeah. So, because I think go on.
It's that perpetual child thing that society puts on somebody with a disability. They're like, oh, they must be cared and nurtured for like a child.
Yes. Yeah. It's like we all have to be sheltered but it all comes down to, again, consent, because what I found is that they reckon, well, a lot of people reckon that think that they can't prove that someone with a disability is consented because maybe they're not of sound mind. And it's just like, oh my God, seriously, if someone came to you with the same question, you'd be like, I'm not answering that. And we're not going to.
Yeah.
I don't know. The whole disability and sexuality thing continues to be such a frustrating topic.
And I feel like lots of as much progress as is made in the world of sexuality in general, there's also greater pushback from those further opposed to that sort of thing.
Do you think that's more of a government influence, or do you think it's just people being ignorant?
I think a lot of that comes from like religious basis.
Yeah.
And then obviously religion still has a huge place in governments for some reason and influence a lot of decisions. But just the whole idea that sex is this hush hush thing, and sex work is stigmatized, and like it's just. I like to think that we're progressing, but little bit by little bit, I guess.
Well, I guess all the work that you do with Touching Base is slightly progressing as well. And I guess you and I can't speed that up, but at least we're doing our bit. So,
Well, I did get, when I was at that expo for Touching Base, a woman in a power chair did abuse us and call us a bunch of whores.
That reminds me, actually, I was doing a talk it was a disability expo, but it was in Melbourne. And I didn't know, but there was a lot of representatives from what was then DHS and also a few, disability service providers. So I'm just going on and being the explicit person that I am. And then they came up to me and said, oh, I'm representing DHS. And I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of want to run and leave out the door, but it was good. You could see that they were actively listening. Not that it made a difference, but it put the idea in people's heads that things need to change. What things are coming up for Touching Base in that sense? Could you reveal anything? As in promotion to try and change that stigmatic thing.
I mean, we're perpetually, lobbying to get sexual services actually properly included in the NDIS and have, its own line item.
Because would that just be in New South Wales, or would that be across the board, do you think?
Look, I actually think that that's where the issue lies, is that the NDIS is obviously a national scheme, but each state has different laws around sex work.
Yeah.
But I mean, that could be included in the wording of it, to be allowed to access sexual services, in line with the laws of your state. But that also, but then you would be able to travel somewhere where it is legal to do that. And I feel like that's it. But no, that so it would be, nationwide for that, because like at the moment, and we've got letters from the minister's office about that, yes, sex services are allowed on the NDIS under certain circumstances, but like without that line item, without actually acknowledging it. And then on top of that, there's so many reports of people being rejected immediately by trying to add it, and you just always have to fight it back.
Yeah, I actually did some research. I knew I was going to get rejected, so I just thought I'll do it anyway to see what happens. And they basically said that if I have a support worker, that if I need them to assist, then it becomes a luxury. And if it wasn't for the NDIS, would I be paying for it anyway? And so I said no in my research. I said no. And they said, regardless of whether you could or not, it's still a luxury. So I came fighting back and I said, well, is it a luxury if you're going home and then sleeping with your partner? Is it a luxury? Are you able to go to the pub and go pick up a random person and have a one night stand? Is that a luxury? And they go, no. I said, well, how does it become a luxury for someone with a disability? It doesn't. And they couldn't.
But look, that was my kind of thing I would always say as well about why it's somebody with a disability, especially say mobility wise.
Yep.
If you went home with somebody from the pub, your support worker or the person helps you into bed, and then the support worker goes, you're stuck there with that random stranger that you've just met in a pub.
Yeah. It's a great line, because then I can see where they're saying from the support worker, then they're putting you in a position that could be potentially dangerous. Yeah, I get that, but we all experience that, whether we have a disability or not, quote unquote. It's a hard one.
Why does the support worker make it a dangerous situation? I'm a bit lost.
No. So the support worker may think that putting you on the bed, let's say it's you, putting you on the bed and then leaving and not coming back could essentially put you in a dangerous situation, which they could have avoided if they didn't do it. You know what I mean? So if somebody gets assaulted and the support workers put them in that position to potentially get assaulted, then they can say, well, if I didn't do that, that wouldn't have happened. But we're all in that same situation.
Yeah, but again, that's also that whole line of the person with disability having agency, and that's their choice to do that, and it's not
absolutely
up to the support worker.
Yeah, which is so I can see it from the support worker's point of view, but it doesn't make it right either. So yeah, it's really tough.
The other thing with the NDIS is that the frontline people who work for NDIS, according to them, that sexual services are not allowed by the, you're not allowed to use your funding for that.
Yeah.
As in, blatantly, they have to say that, and that's not the truth. So exactly. That's something else we keep hearing about.
Yeah, I wonder who makes these decisions. There was something in the grapevine that the person who made that decision had a religious background, and I was like, yeah, well, that makes a whole lot of sense from what you were saying before as well. Yeah.
Well, Stuart Robert was the
that's his
minister.
name. Yes, thank you.
And he's fundamentalist, really.
Yeah, it's a whole frustrating circle of unnecessary stuff that goes on, and hopefully some barriers can be broken somehow. I just wish I knew the answers to that, so I would, go there with a bulldozer and break them all down. But yeah,
there's a lot of walls though.
Yeah, there is a lot of walls. So I guess that's, for me, camming is breaking a bit of walls, because people can be sitting in their chairs watching me or watching whoever and have that kind of release. It's a little one, but it's not exactly what people want, but it's something.
It's something I am passionate about. Obviously, it's the reason I'm even doing this job in the first place, and it's why I'm generally quite happy to do any kind of media stuff, as long as I can drop that in there.
It's been really good to get more insight into you and how you've come about into the industry and stuff. So it's been really good.
Well, thanks for having me on, Mel.
Anyway, thank you so much. It's been awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, everyone, and remember to connect with us on our socials and our Patreon. We'd love to hear from you, and also with your feedback and ideas. Join us next time on the Ably Diverse Chronicles.